everyone. Welcome to another fantastic episode of the Connecting Greeks podcast. I am Ari. I am here with my two distinguished co-hosts, which I'm going to introduce in just a moment. Today's episode is an amazing episode. We have what I like to call a heavy hitter. This guy has done so much. He's fascinating. He's awesome. And before we bring him on, let me introduce my co-host, Foti. What's up, Foti?
How are you, Ari?
I'm doing fantastic. Have you heard from Angelo? What's going on with Angelo? Is he here?
Well, he's always at high C, but I think right now he's probably in a location that we would like to be. But Having said that, let's also introduce Angelo. Angelo, how are you, my friend?
Hi, Forty. Hi, Adi. Yes, I'm shipping, telling jokes on the high seas, but today we're docked in San Francisco.
Ooh.
And it's a beautiful day, 60 degrees, sunny, no clouds. I went and had a slice of pizza at Tony's.
Was it
and
good?
It was delicious. I'm telling you, I know, there's great places to eat in the East, in Montreal, Boston, New York. I'm going to tell you something. This pizza was amazing. And, when Forty said we're bringing our next guest on for Connecting Greeks, I'm going to tell you something. We've had a lot of guests, and I'm not saying this because Mr. Veras is here with us right now, but when you take eight or nine lifetimes of what people could do, and this man's done this, and I mean, what can I say? Former Chief Operating Officer, Chief of Staff, and Executive Producer of the Pro Football Hall of Fame, endless Emmy award-winning producer, every acronym you can think of, CBS, NBC, ABC, Fox, NFL, USFL. He's produced amazing films. He's created exhibits, Ford Hall of Fame, USFL exhibit, Game for Life hologram show with some of the most famous football players ever in American history. Not just there, it doesn't stop there. We're talking produced Yanni live at the Acropolis, which was massive.
That's just insane. That's
massive.
Insane.
And then live at the Taj Mahal, and marketed movies. People he's met. I mean, I can go on, but it's a real honor, Mr. George Veras, to have you on Connecting Greeks. Welcome to the show, George. Welcome.
Well, wonderful to be here. Thank you for that incredible introduction, Angelo. And thank you, Fotios, for reaching out to me, and Ari for joining. Probably the only one you forgot, and you really recalled most of them that I don't have on my resume, is that both my grandparents lived in Queens. My mother's father's side of the family, both Greek Americans. My papu had an ice cream business called Bungalow Bar. He had 45 trucks like Good Humor in New York, in Woodside, Queens, and Brooklyn. If you look on eBay and the website, you'll see some of the trucks. They're highly valued because they look like little bungalows. And even though my dad had a job at Ford, so we left New York. I was born in Detroit. I was in Detroit, Ann Arbor, and Cleveland through my high school years. But every summer, we'd come back for the Ikoyenya, and my papu had me teach. He'd bring a Greek immigrant in a month to give him a job in the factory. And so I was in the bedroom with the Greek immigrant. My job was to teach him baseball, English, and then I went to the popsicle factory, and I was like Lucille Ball at the end of the factory line. All the women with hairnets, the popsicles would come tumbling down. They put them in paper, but I was the kid at the end of the line that I had to put 6 popsicles in every box as they were coming at me fast and furious. And that probably was one of the most fun memories that I still have in my head. And then our ice box was so small, my papu's house, a small, big, narrow brick building built in 1919, that the only way that he could stuff ice cream to bring to me was put in a box with a huge piece of dry ice.
Right.
And I used to take my grandmother's kutalia and try to lift the dry ice up to stick my hand in. And those are the kutalia that used to chase me around and hit me all the time because I was stealing the ice cream. So I know we can all relate to that, but that was probably my best job.
That's, George, it's interesting you say that. No matter when you talk to Greek Americans, basically anybody Greeks in the diaspora around the world, it's everybody, regardless of whatever success or things they've achieved in their life, everyone, and it's so refreshing to hear it from a man like yourself, everybody has that same story. Our parents instilled work ethic into us as kids. And I honestly think a lot of the, hearing from what you just said, and it was a great story, that they instill that work ethic from your papu, from your parents. As young kids, I think we can all relate to that, where, okay, you can do what you want, but you got to come help the family business.
Mm-hmm.
You got to learn responsibility. You got to, like, you know, in my house, my dad, old Spartan, there was no such thing as welfare or unemployment. It was either you go to school or you're going to come and work in the restaurant. It was tough love. And I think, and this is an interesting topic, and maybe you guys can all attribute to this. Do you think maybe nowadays we're a bit lax with the new generation? Because a lot of people are like, I don't know what I want to do. Our parents didn't know what they were going to do. They came here and they actually didn't know the language. They made something out of something and gave us the opportunities to pursue things that we wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Well,
how do you feel about that?
Well, they say you're a reflection of your children, or your children are a reflection of you. And
Right.
I don't, it's not like I'm saying all my 4 sons are like believable, but they definitely, you know, they're range from 44 to 27. The 44-year-old, who is a PhD in astronomy, works and runs one of the world's leading research institutes in Warwick and Birmingham, worked in Cambridge with Hawking. His whole life is astronomy. He's not married or anything. And he had Crohn's disease when he was 17. He was a wrestler. And thank God we're able to figure out which part of the intestine to take out, so he hasn't had reoccurring. But here's my point about telling you that. He fasts for 40 days going into Easter. He has no business fasting for 40 days. He has Crohn's disease. You got to eat the right way.
Mm-hmm.
So he eats less than the right way, and he does get some troubles back. Not a thing, but when we Skyped him on Sunday, we Skype him every Sunday, he just shrugs it off. It's like, that's what I got to do. You know, my 33 or 36, 37-year-old, who was the only one who got married so far, great Italian-American gal, Eastchester, New York, Italian community, same as Greek, but Greg takes our granddaughter to Greek church.
Yeah.
Friday. Okay. Alex, who's here with us in Cleveland, who's a banker at PNC, University of Michigan, gentle giant, carried the cross, 6'5". You know, they want him on the board at the church. Was an altar boy at Holy Trinity in New Rochelle, an altar boy here when we came back to Cleveland. And then my youngest, Christopher, who was an associate producer at Fox News in Washington for Howard Kurtz, and had a struggle, and they all had struggles on the way, is what I'm trying to say. I'm not, it's just in order to pop out. And it was a team effort with my mother-in-law and myself. But you're right in the sense that we were brought up not to expect any of that. And they see that. They absolutely see it. And not everybody's going to follow it. And some people, unfortunately, but from what I've seen in the Greek community, not just talking to you guys, but, you know, when I did 3 documentaries and interviewed 100 Greek Americans on public television, this was a universal story. Yeah, I'll compare us to other ethnic groups. It's just, you know, we all know that we're like the Jews in a big way. Number 1 in education, number 1 in making money.
Mm-hmm.
You know, huge family structure. I grew up in Shaker Heights. Every one of my friends in my block was Jewish. I went to NYU, which was all Jewish. And as a matter of fact, there was a group called the All Powerful Six: Greenbaum, Fort Gang, Sukaskis, Beckerman. They adopted me as like their goy puppy. Right? But they saw it. They love my dad. They love my family. You know, it was the same thing. So I'm sure. Tell me about yourselves. Tell us. You know, what has it been like for you growing up Greek?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds exactly, that's the story. My parents came here from Greece. You know, my dad, restaurant business, wanted us to do more than what he did, and I probably will never achieve even a tenth of what he did. But it was all about the kids. Ta pedia, let's work hard. Let's give them a better life. You know what? In hindsight, and it's always in hindsight, right? It's like, what a great experience that was. At the moment, they're stressed about what they're going to have, what they're going to make, what their kids are going to do. It's a stress. It's a stress. It's a stress. Now in hindsight, it's like, my God, they gave us a great life. I wouldn't trade it in for anything. I'm sure Foti, Angelo, and George yourself, relate to that, as you guys have said. But yeah, it's a universal story. And the more we do this podcast, the more we start to realize you could be from the very, very top to the very, very bottom, and you have a similar story. Like it's just how we live. It's how we are, especially in this moment of time. We're in a very specific moment of time where there was a great migration over here to North America, and they put roots down,
right?
And they gave us great life, and now we're doing a podcast because we love that Greek life.
And if I can add to that, Ari and Angelo and George, if you want to actually chime in on this, and Angelo, you had these experiences. No matter where you travel, as Ari has said, as Greeks in the diaspora, you don't have to know each other, but we walk the same path. And how is that? That every Greek shares the same similar experience from an upbringing perspective.
It's true.
It is. Well, my dad would always say to us, okay, if you can do 1/3 of what I've done, I'll be happy. I go, how about half? No, half is too much. Do 1/3. I'm like, they were philosophers. Ένα τρίτο, άμα κάνεις ένα τρίτο, θα είμαι ευχαριστημένος. Και τα μισά δεν γίνεται. So, because that was his way of challenging us. Like, if you guys can do this, a third will be happy.
Yeah.
And those are you have to laugh at this sometimes, because those are the stories of how things happen. But George, I have to, your path is quite interesting. So and I got to bring this up, at 15 years old, you were a ball boy for the New York Jets, and you met that time, for his first time on the field, a man named Joe Namath that I think you're still friends with to this day. I mean, this is history, right? And here you are.
Yeah, I'm like, well, that came about because, again, my all sides of my family was Greek. My mother's brother-in-law was a product of a divorced household. His name was James Nicholas, and his mother, Mama Nicholas, up in Washington Heights, was a determined hairdresser that saved enough money to save Jim and Cal to go to med school. They were going to NYU med school from the minute they came out of her womb.
Wow.
And they went to med school. Cal was an internist. Jim was an orthopedist. They loved sports. They loved playing it. And he was a gregarious guy. He worked at Lenox Hill Hospital under a guy whose name was Sidney Gaynor, who was the first ever team physician in the sport. He was a Yankee team in 1949. He was out of Oklahoma. He sort of created the specialty of sports medicine as a sub-branch of just orthopedics. Because sports medicine is just not the orthopedics. Today it's huge. It's nutrition. It's prosthetics. It's like everything, because sports is so big. Then if sports so small, well, okay, let's make it sports medicine. Maybe we'll get a certified trainer to be a therapist instead of a guy just slapping tape on people.
Yeah.
So he became Lenox Hills at Madison and Park between 77, sort of a hospital for the rich and famous, many ship owners. Jackie Onassis, who had her house around the corner. The president came there, John Kennedy. Nick ran into a guy named Harry Wismer. Harry Wismer ran and owned WMCA New York 570, and he bought the AFL New York Titans. So when I was trudging back to my papu's house in August in the summers, Nick came over. He would eat my papu's fasolada. My papu was a cook. He had a kitchen downstairs. He made the lamb. He made the orzo. Nick came over with Kiki. They would eat with my parents coming in from Detroit, and he would take me to the Titans preseason games. There were 4,000 people at the Polo Ground. 4,000. The Polo Ground was a dump because the Giants and the Dodgers had left to go to LA in '58. And I'm going up the steps where Willie Mays caught the catch in center field. That's where the locker rooms were. and there were only 8 shower heads for the Titans. I mean, it was like, but they were like gods. And actually, in that room were 2 future Hall of Famers who I later ended up serving, Clyde Bulldog Turner and Sammy Baugh. But here's my point. I'm talking to you like this is like, I could go through the whole roster of the New York Titans. You wouldn't know who the hell I'm talking about. And for some reason, I've always had this stick with stats, numbers, and players. I played dice baseball games. I watched TV endlessly. I read sports columns. I read sporting news. And then when I got the opportunity to be around these guys, it was like a movie going on in my head. So 3 years later, Sonny Werblin, Phil Island buy the Titans. They make them the Jets. They sign Joe. Joe got hurt, if you remember, his junior year on an option play with his knee.
Right.
Because Bear Bryant, he was a running quarterback. They just drained the knee. They did nothing else. So now Sonny brings him up to what's the name of that? Mike Minucci's restaurant, which was a big watering hole for the Giants. And he was sticking a fork in the Giants' face by having a jet press conference to announce Joe Namath. In walks Joe Namath. Now, I wasn't there for this. In walks Joe. My uncle had never seen him. They signed him without my uncle ever examining him. And he said to him, "Hey, Doc, you better go take his pants down and tell me how his knee is." He came back to Sonny. He goes, "Sonny, he's got medial collateral, anterior collateral, 3 collateral ligament ruptures. He's got torn cartilages." He says, "We got to operate on this guy right away. I have no idea how I'm going to make him stand up." You know what Sonny Werblin said to him? "Hey, Doc, that's your job. Figure it out."
Wow.
And what he did is down the hall, again, because I worked at the place for 5 years and I knew it backwards at Lenox Hill, was the polio shop, the brace shop run by a guy named Eddie Castiglia. And my uncle went to him and wrote on a napkin a knee brace that had cylinder hinges for the first time ever. Most knee braces were just steel to steel, so you'd walk stiff-legged like this.
Wow.
To bend the knee, he just created a rotating sort of a wheel so that the steel you could go like this. You only go forward, but you couldn't go lateral like that.
Yeah.
And that was the first knee brace. And when I came to the Hall of Fame to interview for the job in 2009, the executive director, Joe Horrigan, who, and again, this happens to me my whole life, this Waldo situation, he and I were ball boys together when the Bills played the Jets, sharing ice buckets in Allentown, Pennsylvania in 1967.
Wow.
Wow.
It's 2009. He's at the Hall. I've done some stuff with him. I did the All Madden team at the Hall of Fame. I premiered my movie on NFL Films, Titan the Spiral. Joe Horgan said, "I got to show you something." He had the knee brace as an exhibit of history in the hospital, in the Hall of Fame. I didn't put it there. He had it there. That's how famous it became. So to answer your questions, I was sort of like at the crux of history, but at the time, the AFL was like a dump. When I moved back to Cleveland to go to high school, I used to get beat up wearing my Jet jersey. The AFL was like the enemy. But yet now, today, you know, the merger, and I was on the field for that, and yes, you're right. And the type of guy Joe Namath is, I'll share this with you, the same today as he was then. He was a teammate. He was charming. He was had gratitude. He listened to Weed Eubank. He had respect. When my father died in West Palm Beach, my dad was a World War II veteran, MIT, greatest generation, co-captain of the soccer team at MIT, looked like Arnold Palmer, played golf and company softball, the whole deal. Spoke perfect Greek, read perfect Greek. Okay, went to Athens College for like 10 years when his parents left the United States and came to Greece just to get away from the war. So my dad passes away. I'm in Palm Beach. I'm talking to my dad's widow's son, who's like my brother, Peter Anton. My dad married another Greek American. My mother died of Alzheimer's early in life. Mother-in-law found him another Greek American, of course. So I was a big man, of course. And I'm on the deck, and who's calling me up? Joe Namath. It's on my phone. Peter Anton's looking at it. He's going, "That's Joe Namath?" Yeah. "Hey, George, I read about your dad. I'm so sorry." Because he lives right up the block in Boynton Beach.
Wow.
Wow.
And that's the type of guy. And I don't call Joe Namath. But whenever the time comes, it's like two guys who rode bikes together.
Wow.
That's amazing. because you brought up those NFL films, and I know you're a part of those things. Those things were amazing. If any marketing from any sport, you remember those films? It was was the guy Harry Callis and Steve Sable?
It was Steve, very good. Harry Callis, but it was John Facenda was the voice.
The voice, John Facenda. That guy was like,
Those were on Saturdays.
Yeah, remember it was a cold day, 1973 in Minnesota. A day the fans would never forget. Those films were so compelling. Even if you weren't a football fan, you would watch it because that guy's voice was so, and the way they shot it and the guy's voice, I was always, in fact, even as a kid, when I would watch that, it would be like, wow, they took a sport and the marketing for the NFL, because I know you're Roger Goodell has said some awesome things about you. I know you've won endless Emmys and you produce documentaries and you produce films along all the other things you've done. But it's amazing to me that marketing at that time, we're talking, 40, 50 years ago, when the league was coming up. I don't know if you guys already fought, you've probably seen those films.
Absolutely.
Where, it's just, you're just like this, you're watching it. Was that, I wanted to ask you, George, is that something that was, what was the brainstorming behind that? Because it really worked.
It was the Sables. Yeah, I did a document. They let me do their documentary. And so It started with Ed Sable, who was a shoe salesman in Philadelphia, but he was taking home movies like crazy of his son, Steve Sable, riding his bike and stuff like that. And it's 1962. He has a passion for filmmaking. Through his friends at NFL Films, he reached out to Pete Rozelle and got the rights to film the Giants championship game in 1963, which was cold as hell, the Giants and the Bears. And he brought, and I have this all in the documentary, if you ever watch it, it's called Tight in the Spiral, where Steve Sable talks about his dad's philosophy was you couldn't have enough. If they wanted 4 cameras, get 8. Something could screw up. They brought 8 cameras, 4 froze, and they edited this film. And then a year later, Sable made an unbelievable deal where NFL Films basically is the right holder to anything that is NFL. And I think that deal is still intact today, as amazing as it is.
Wow.
And so that's what began. And, they did Football Follies. They did the first, what became that whole genre, which still stands today, of bloopers.
Yeah.
And when they showed it to the owners went crazy against them. You're demeaning the sport. It's going to be terrible. Why are you making us look like? And it actually became the richest selling product that they had. And
that's awesome.
That just shows to show you, if you watch the opening is one of my. Hold on, I got to make sure I got enough power in here. Was my favorite opening, where a crusty old Ed Sable. I start out with some music and you show a play like of guys coming to the line, and Ed Sable goes, George Hallis didn't get it, and then you hear the music. Dun, 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 dun.
Yeah.
Wellington Mayor didn't even know what it was. Dun, 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 dun. Curly Lambeau, he couldn't give a damn about it. And that's how they thought about NFL Films when it started. But visionaries go where places, don't usually exist. They're always being criticized because they're doing something new. And let me tell you, it was the same thing when I did Yanni live at the Acropolis. We did a whole documentary. Actually, we didn't do the live at the Acropolis, but the live at the Acropolis stories in Yanni's book, Yanni in Words. But that journey, nobody gave us a shot. It was a wing and a prayer. And sure, in hindsight, people look back and go, "Yeah, well, of course it's going to be great." No. That was a 4-year journey where nobody believed us.
George, can I chime in on what you're saying right now? You said it perfectly. In hindsight, it's like amazing. Oh my God, like it's an obvious thing now, but you said it was like nobody gave you a chance. Like it was difficult. How do you keep like your motivation, or how do you keep
Okay.
positivity
Yeah.
when you're in that moment. Like now we could look back and be like, yeah, it's obvious. It was great.
I'm doing it.
But it wasn't like that when you were doing it. And it fascinates me with people who persevere through all those difficulties and how they stick to it. I mean, is that something that's inside you, confidence? Is it something that you see in Yanni? So you're like, it's going to work. Like, what was it that kept you going for that?
I think it started with the most unconditional love that I got from my parents. My parents let me do anything. And I wasn't a wild kid, but you know, I'd be playing baseball in backyards and hitting windows out.
Yeah.
My parents sent me to a sleepaway camp because friends convinced them that I needed to do it. I was like 11 years old. We lived in a cul-de-sac in Ann Arbor. We flew up in a guy's private plane. The engine stopped in the middle of the air. He restarted it. He was a ballsy guy. He owned this camp. If you take my black and white pictures of that camp, I didn't have a pair of sneakers. My mother gave me black dress shoes with white socks. And you know what? I didn't give a shit. It never even occurred to me. I still was the best baseball player out there in the field. I learned to ride horses, shoot bow and arrow, shoot a gun. And in 8 weeks away, 1960, 61, what am I, 10, 11 years old? I had 2 phone calls from my parents. Nobody ran up to visit to me. Nobody called me every night to hold nobody. And that incredible sense of confidence and freedom, I think, to answer your question, now in the professional world, you have to believe it. I thought Yanni, the reason why I got to Yanni is when I was at the NFL Today and at CBS from 81 to 94, I was using his music where nobody else was in features. And John Tesh was another instrumentalist who was brilliant. And he was at CBS. People forget this before Entertainment Tonight.
Entertainment Tonight, yeah.
Right, that's right.
CBS Sports. He was anchoring. He was doing Tour de France. And so when he signed a record album with a company called Private Music and went out to California, Yanni signed with Private Music, which was a division of BMG. And this was these new age artists, Enya, Yanni, Kataro.
Yeah.
But, you know, they played in rock bands or they played with like 3-man groups and they had a niche, but they weren't, nobody compared to what was going on with the Rolling Stones and the Springs, you know, the mainstream of shit. They're like nowhere. But when I used his music, he then hooked up with Linda Evans.
That's right.
1990, and I'm still at CBS. And she convinces him, she's a brilliant producer, you need an orchestra around you to make yourself look big. It's never going to work as a band. And you need to get on TV. And if you have an orchestra, you can get on TV.
Wow.
So he calls me up and said, you know, have you ever directed a music concert? It was 1990. I said, no, but how hard can it be? I direct things that move. And that wasn't the real reason. I know your music better than anybody. I'm going to know exactly when to squeeze the emotion out of a shot. So I made a bid. I got a deal. I went on a weekend. I was still at CBS. We did this pilot show in Dallas. I go back in the locker room, green room. He says, what do you think? I go, look, it's 7 cameras. The lighting's flat. It's $47,000. So it is what it is. But it can be incredible. And one day, it's Greek boy comes home and does good. We got to play at the Herodakis Theater. And he and I were thinking the exact same way. How much will it cost? It's going to cost $750,000 to $1 million. I'll get back to you. Well, the get back to me was 3 years later. It took him that long.
What?
But meanwhile, I have a full-time job at CBS Sports. I'm producing the World Series pregame. I'm saving Tim McCarver's career when Deion Sanders, and matter of fact, you guys could go to YouTube. If you YouTube Tim McCarver and Deion Sanders, you will see me flashing across the screen trying to stop Deion Sanders. So our producer was putting the water bucket on McCarver.
Oh, wow.
Okay? And actually, my son, after all these years, because the YouTube is Charlie Steiner, it's only about like 47 seconds. I'll try to find it probably one. He actually did a freeze frame showing me shooting me out of the left-hand side of the thing because he got so tired trying to freeze the freeze frame the whole time. But the point was, when Yanni came to me, and I met him here in Cleveland in August of '93, he had, he had the money. He thought he had an orchestra. The shows were supposed to be September 22nd, 23rd, 24th. I had the TV truck. I had the TV crew from England. And I said, I'll see you in Greece. I got to go do baseball. I'll be there the week of. Every weekend I have to be on the road with Pat O'Brien doing the pregame and the postgame. September 4th, I'm sitting in an edit room. I get a call from him in a panic. I don't have an orchestra. What do you mean I don't have an orchestra? Theodorakis screwed me. He gave me the Greek Youth Symphony, not the Greek Symphony Orchestra.
Oh, wow.
God.
So I'm like, now, again, an occurrence of God, and you got to have a belief in God, and I have a big belief in God. And I just pray that I can always see his steps for me. So when I went to survey in Athens and bring the British crew, because they have to see the venue, you always have to do a survey. They're going to put the truck and the cameras and shit like that. And I always used to cheat off of the CBS expense account. If I'm surveying in Lillehammer for the Olympics, I would route myself through Athens so I could go drop myself off and survey for Yanni and not cost them money.
Wow.
So I did this in mid-August, this chicanery. And he said to me, hey, I want you to meet an agent as you're flying through London on the way to Athens, because I might tour in Greece after I do Acropolis. So I met this stuffed up British agent. I'll get to the whole story in a second. And he like dissed me. He said, what do you want? The Royal Philharmonic? You want the London Symphony Orchestra? We don't play Yanni. We don't do Yanni. We don't do that type of thing. I said, wait a minute. Am I missing something here? Didn't you do the Moody Blues and Nights in White Satin? What the fuck were those guys?
Yeah. Yeah.
You got to know your shit to sort of check them at the box, or else they're just going to roll over you. But I said to him, look, here's my card. Who knows? I'll be back. So now September 5th, and I call him up. And I said, hey, look, this is the deal. You got 24 hours, $125,000 all in, all media rights worldwide. We'll fly to Greece. We'll put your pasty white Englishman on a beach in a hotel to get a nice suntan. They're going to have 3 days of rest. Then we rehearse, we play, and they go back. Well, I don't, you got 24 hours. I don't have time to screw around. You don't understand. I'm calling, you're not exclusive. I'm calling everybody. Yanni was like in a panic.
Wow.
That's how I got the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra.
Wow.
That's insane.
I'll end with, not even end. Remember I said to you, I'd get them flights? There was no money in flights to fly these guys in. I walked in after that weekend to Olympic Airlines in Manhattan. And I knew the guy, forget his name, I'll think of him in a second. And I said, you can be the title sponsor for our PBS special, Live at the Acropolis, brought to you by Olympic Airlines. We need X amount of seats from LA. We need X amount of seats from London. We need X amount of seats. I didn't have a deal with PBS. I thought,
oh my God.
I thought I was going to get a deal, but I didn't have a deal with CBS.
Right.
And as a matter of fact, so to tell you that we were living on the edge is the understatement. And the other thing is, I was working full time at CBS. I had my wife, I had 3 kids, and yet I managed to bring my wife, my dad, my mother-in-law, my 2-year-old son to Live at the Acropolis. I managed to get all the tapes, the shit out of there. I managed to edit the show. I managed to get it on PBS. And as I was still working at CBS full time.
Unbelievable. And George, that wasn't.
What?
But George, that wasn't because I filmed a comedy special. I do in Greece. And as much as I love our culture, as much as I love our people, they're not the easiest people to deal with, because last minute we were filming at the Kakoyani Center. Oh no, whoa, we agreed to this. So they will hold you hostage for the buck. I hate to say it, but it's true. Because they see, what are you going to do with this?
But Angelo, here's the difference. I had done shows in Caracas, Venezuela, where they tried to screw us through in the Pan Am Games. They said they built the broadcast center, they didn't. I had done boxing shows in Tobago, in Trinidad, in Kingston, Jamaica, in
man.
world countries where they're all trying to screw you.
Yeah.
When I went to do the boxing show at the Marlena Adi Stadium, the stadium is a dump. It's not enclosed. Well, see, ABC had done a boxing match in Cuba with Teofilo Stevenson, a heavyweight, and an uncovered ring, and the fight got canceled in the middle of the fight when the rain pour came down. The ring was too slippery.
Oh my gosh.
The Jamaican organizers, I am not doing this fight unless I see a cover over that ring. And it's a Friday night with a match on Saturday. There was no cover in the ring. I went into my crew and I said, get in the cars. We're going back to Miami. I called CBS, said, have the tape ready. We get to the airport. They wouldn't let us on the plane. They reject our passports. I told my guys, I expected that. We're just going to sleep it out. We're going to just stay. We're not going to a hotel. We're staying at the airport, sleep it out. And at 2 a.m, the police brought vans in. They told us come back to the venue, and guess what was over the ring? A tarp.
Oh wow!
I gotta.
Now let me tell you what the British said. So I know that about the Greeks, but they're not like these other guys. But you always have to have backup plans. And my crew was English, and this is what the T-shirts they made for this venue on their own. You ready?
Right.
Yanni live at the Acropolis. We came, we saw, they lied. Okay? So that when the lie was, they were trying to hold us up for more money.
Oh.
Petrol trucks didn't come to fuel the generator tank so we could do the lighting test with the lights at the Parthenon. And I had my backup plan where we had vans with gas can cases, and I took them and we went to gas stations and we filled our own shit up.
Oh my God.
Wow.
I'm going to say one quick thing. We've interviewed and met a lot of Greeks. I'm going to say something for the first time. George, I'm glad you're on our team, the Greek team, because the amazing.
And that's not even what we did in India. I mean,
At the Taj Mahal, I was going to say that's got to be.
that was actually more historical. It didn't get the attention. Look, Yanni Live at the Acropolis is
That's a staple.
Huge.
That's a staple in our culture.
staple,
Like,
history making, no question about it. To this day, he must have played that song a million times. But the Taj Mahal was a game changer for the country of India. And it was because of Yanni's persona and the way that he treated their culture with respect.
mhm.
I mean, we got sued by it. It was really unbelievable. So to answer your question, even now, as I remake myself as Veras Commuications and I go back to my own company, you know, in 5 months, I probably have really 8 ridiculous projects going on that, you know, only because I believe when I conceived it, I could make it happen. And everybody says to me, well, how do you make it happen? I said, well, if I believe I have to make it happen, I have to figure out a pathway. And to be honest with you, it's been faster now because I've made so many contacts over so many years. It was harder before. And people are sort of tired of dealing with agencies and big corporations. If you can give them personalized service, it's a different thing. You know, I'm doing this consulting. I did write my book, and it's now in the hands of a book editor called The American Dream Job, but I want to make it a TV series. You know, this is the last lap. I want to go out big. So
awesome.
Go big or go broke. There you go.
It's amazing, George, what you've, I mean, one episode with you on our show isn't enough. I mean, it isn't, because I could listen to you all day because these stories, you're such a great storyteller, but it's coming from a center of truth. I have to ask you something, and this is something personal, and I'm going to ask you. You may be the person that can answer this. You know, I'm born in Montreal, Canada, and that's right. And I'm a Montreal Expos fan. So in 1992 and 93, the Blue Jays won the World Series.
Right, I was there.
You were there. End of 93.
Yeah, Joe Carter.
Remember the Expos? Yeah, the Expos were running for the end of it when they had Felipe Alou as the manager. In 94, the strike happened in August, and they made in 94. It's the only season baseball never came back. Now, I don't want to sound like a conspiracist, but Montreal was first place overall in the major leagues. I worked with Paul Giamatti, the actor. We did a film called Cinderella Man. And I asked Paul, I said, Paul, your father was the commissioner of baseball. And even Russell Crowe didn't know this when we were filming this film in Toronto. I said, is it true or is it a conspiracy that in 94, they didn't, it was the only season Major League Baseball never finished in its history. They didn't want to come back. They feared an all-Canada World Series because the Blue Jays were in first place and the Expos were ahead of the Braves. And I said to them, we never got redemption. And Felipe Alou said, even when he won the World Series in 97 with the Marlins, he said the team in 94 in Montreal was 10 times better than that team. Pedro Martinez and everything. Now, I'm asking you, I mean, I'm not putting you in the spot. It's not, is it a conspiracy? Why didn't they finish that season? I know the other guys are Red Sox fans. They don't care. But as a Montreal fan, it bothers me. What do you feel about it, George? I don't know.
Conspiracy is today's great catchword on everything. To be
Right.
honest with you, it's the first time I heard that one. So but I could tell you Bart Giamatti died, his father, of a massive heart attack.
Right.
And you know the story about how if you had studied the photo the right way, you could have saved the guy's life. There's a photo of him, and I think it was at the All-Star game, and his hands are over the rail. And if you blow up the photo, he had split skin on his nails because the blood pressure was so high.
Oh my
Oh, right.
Blasting through his heart.
Wow.
Somebody had noticed,
Wow.
doctor noticed that they could at least take him to the hospital that day. And like 3 days later, he
gosh.
died of a mass. I don't know if it was
Wait.
a widow or whatever, but tell me about dealing with, I love Paul Giamatti. He's one of my favorite actors. He's incredible.
He's
Yeah,
awesome.
Paul's great because we did the film with Russell Crowe, Renee Zellweger, and I played John Savage. I played a reporter for the New York Times, and we filmed it in Toronto. And it was Russell Crowe. It was a Ron Howard film, and about James Braddock, the boxer in the 30s. And I played, and I think so when I saw, because we'd sit around in our outfits or costumes, and there's Paul Giamatti. And I said to him, Paul, he's a great actor, he's on Billions. And then I told him that, and he kind of looked at me and he goes, there were talks with the networks. Because here's my theory on this, George. It's the only season Major League Baseball never finished.
Well,
And we were in first place.
we don't want to see Canada be the winners of the World
Dude, if Major League didn't want 2 Canadian teams in the championships, they should have given 2 teams to Canada. But I know I'm making fun of this. But then I said to him, no, but what's the difference? Because 92, 93, the Blue Jays won. So 94, it looked like Montreal had a really, really good shot of winning the World Series. John Wetland, Pedro Martinez, Alou, that team, they got 5 or 6 Hall of Famers on it.
Wasn't Vladimir on there, Guerrero?
Vladimir, yes. Vladimir was on that team. They got Martinez from the Dodgers because the Dodgers thought he wasn't a good pitcher, but Felipe Alou knew him from the Dominican leagues and said, this guy's a diamond in the rough, so it was the whole thing. But anyways, that's the Greek part of me, the conspiracy.
Yeah, my grandmother's all Greek grandparents are all great conspiracy artists. Oh yeah, they're the absolute. They give you the mati, they give you the whole thing. Remember, when I took care of my mother's mother, who came, my mother, my papa had the ice cream factories in New York. He was taking care of his 2 nieces because their mother had died from tuberculosis. So.
Right.
His family was back in Greece. So they came through Lisbon in 1940. They come to New York. They are, my grandmother never learned to speak a word of English in the 55 years she lived in New York. because the whole neighborhood was Greek, like completely Greek. So when I moved in with her after college to save money to buy a house for 4 years, I would take care of her, and that was a loose term. But I never forget the thing she wanted me to do once a week that now has become a fad: Vanduzas.
Vanduzas, yeah. My dad did those.
Vanduzas. But my grandmother had the most unbelievable, beautiful skin, but I was scared to shit I was going to pop one of those things and blood would come out and shit like that. And she would never got sick. She lived till 102.
Wow. Oh, yeah. Something about those.
Something about Vanduzas.
Well, George, we're getting close to the hour mark here, but before we let you go, because the guy says, can you tell us a little bit about the American dream job? This, I know it's something that you're passionate about and you've been working about, so we can, because I was really fascinated when I read about that. Well, what's that all about?
Thank you. It's about that everybody has a dream job if they just look around to let it and not let it happen, but make it happen. And it's for years I had this PR guy saying to me, because we were on the road together, he goes, "You think that your story is like everybody else." He said, "Your story is like 20 other people, but it's rolled into one person." He says, "You've got to write it down so people realize when they're trying something, it is attainable, but they just have to never stop trying to do it if they really want it." And so his name was Sammy Steinlight, who's the PR guy for the Knicks. And so when I left the Hall, I began furiously writing, just poured out of me, as they said, and somebody's got to give. It just poured out of her when Diane was writing the book. And I think it also shows how keeping relationships, Joan Namath, 50 years. The guys who were my production assistants at CBS who are now direct and produced the Super Bowl. Jim Nance, who I knew in '86. Priests that I know for 50 years. Maintaining and refreshing relationships, and then recognizing when these paths start to coincidence that I was telling you about like before, these unbelievable connectives, and that those are the signs to keep on going. And it's not for everybody, but what I know everybody, a lot of people have written their lives, they just don't know where to put it. I want to sort of be that celebrity panel that picks the next guy who's going to get our next gal American dream job. And that's why I'd rather make it a TV series. I don't want it to be a one-off, a franchise. And I think it also celebrates America, which still by far, all you got to do is travel around the world. And then you know why everybody wants to come here. I know we got it aboard right now.
Absolutely.
But it ain't close. It's not close. This is so better than anywhere else. It ain't close.
Well said.
It's true.
Well said.
It's true. I 100% agree with you, George. George, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on. We really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. I'm sure a lot of people are going to be inspired by this. And are we still going to do the questions for George about the Greek questions?
Well, why not? I mean, George,
do it, because I think George would be great for this. I'll give it to 40 and then Ari, but it's been a pleasure to have you on, George.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for the time. For us, this is honorable to have you on our show, considering your background, because listening to your stories as a young Greek American who loved American sports. I mean, as a young kid, I played every sport you can imagine in my neighborhood through high school as well, and had that dream of becoming that, being involved in that world. And you actually let us live that through your stories. So I wanted to thank you for taking the time and, setting the nostalgic element of our upbringing as Greek Americans. But as Angela has met, and this is not the first time, we'd love to actually have you come back with us. We feel that you're part of our family at Connecting.
I'm honored. Thank you.
Absolutely. We as Greek Americans, we share a lot of similar stories. We just discussed this with this last half hour. And as Greek Americans, we also want to discuss this in sharing the stories of some of the interesting elements growing up through our family, right? So one of the elements that we like to also share is from these three questions is, As a Greek American, George, can you tell us what was your favorite and least favorite Greek food growing up as a kid?
My favorite Greek food was galaktobouriko with ice cream.
The with ice cream, okay.
That's
My,
good.
my least favorite food was bamias.
Oh, that's the top of the
What, you
list.
don't like slimy food?
That was the top of the list.
Okra.
All right. So galaktobouriko with ice cream and bamyas.
I'm on board. I'm on
All
board.
right, all right.
Yeah.
And George, you made references and reflections with your parents and your grandparents growing up. Were there any Greek sayings that you can remember as a kid that stuck with you or has just embedded with you as some of these sayings as our parents would give us growing up as Greeks? So was there anything that maybe you can share with us that still resonates with you?
It was short and sweet, and it was my grandmother. Yerese pudimu yerese.
Very, very.
And she started telling me this when she was in her 80s, and she was 102. So
True.
that juxtaposition of gloom and doom. They were always, it was always the gloom and doom side that seemed to permeate.
Oh yeah.
It's classic.
Classic. It's just
That's classic.
And,
I'm the Nekopethani. I'm the Nekopethani.
oh no.
Lavin Doyle's.
Όταν πεθάνω,
and you'll know.
θα με
They
σκέφτεσαι.
love that.
Yeah, that,
Yes.
Τι έλεγες.
I'm skeptic. I love that.
Τι έλεγες. Δεν με ακούσεις τώρα, ξέρω. I said,
We need to merchandise these sayings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Merchandise these sayings. And last question, George, for you, you mentioned about, how we, belief is a big part of, our upbringing in our faith. But aside from that, I think we're also as Greeks pretty superstitious. Is there any superstition that you still live by as a Greek American?
I've sort of washed that out. I'm a factoid guy.
Okay.
Bravo. Bravo, Yorgo.
I really don't go down. I don't go down the conspiracy path. The conspiracy and the superstition path. It dilutes my positivity, and
Oh, that's a good answer.
Very interesting.
not saying that it doesn't exist, but especially because I've heard so much of it. Vietnam War, shooting Martin Luther King, race riot. Okay, Black Lives Matter. Okay, yeah. All right, that happens. That's American history. They were John Brown's farm. Okay, but until it happens, I don't waste my time believing it. I got too many other things
Good
that
for
I
you.
want to get done that take positivity and hope to reach out and remember enough of my web to understand my shortest distance to that success. And I don't want to clutter my mind.
So the real question is, who got to you, George, to make you say that? Who got to you?
Well, it was what I said to you before. I think my parents, I never really remember getting, quote, much advice from my parents. My mother was not that. My mother was a sweet, nurturing, otitelis nakanis person who was a poor peasant girl who loved everything American and loved my dad, and they were meant for each other. And my papu bought, she didn't drive in this country. She lived here for 20 years, never learned to drive. My papu bought her a Ford Falcon and taught her how to drive in the streets of Ann Arbor, Michigan, which for my mother was like being in Antarctica after having lived in Greece and New York.
No kidding.
But she was that type of person. And my dad just loved living the American dream, and he didn't have anything to bitch about, so there was really no bitching going on.
You know what? That's the first time somebody answered like that, and you know what? I respect that answer very much. So
Yes, seriously.
That's good.
bravo.
I feel it. I mean, I've asked myself that question before, and that's the only thing I can come up with.
Love it.
You know, guys, I enjoyed this so much. Please, George, please come back, because I think there's a lot more we could talk about.
I'm honored.
Yes.
Thank you.
And the stories are fascinating. Just, you know, you haven't accomplished that much. I mean, someday maybe you'll do something, but the stories you said are great. And I know for myself, and I'm sure Foti and I'm sure Ange, you could chime in, like, what a pleasure to have you here.
Well, you guys,
Yeah.
you've been wonderful, and you know, Angelo, great storytelling on your own part, and
Thanks.
it really, and Ari, thank you for listening and joining in, and Fotios for putting it together. Like I said to Fotios, it's just so great that you guys keep on doing this. I think it's a way we have to connect with our community, and I'd like to find a way to get it on a bigger and better platform for you, because it's all about that. But let's hope that this jolts the needle a little bit for you.
Absolutely.
Sure. Well, thanks, George. Thanks again, George.
All right,
Thank you.
Hanukkah, thank you. Peace, guys.
Thank you.
We
Thanks,
want to
George.
thank our hosts, Foti Stamos, Angelo Tsarouchas, as always. I'm not thanking myself, but thank the host. Thank you so much, George Veras, for
Awesome.
everything that you brought to the table, for telling us your stories, for taking the time to be with us. We're going to have you back. We have to have you back. We loved it. This was a great episode.
And if we do that, ask the audience in advance. Let's get some audience questions in.
That's a
Very
good
good
idea. That's
All
a
right.
great idea.
You know,
Yeah.
you should do something in media, George, because you have a talent right there. So thank you so much for being with us. Thank you, everybody out there, for watching and listening. Connecting Greeks, another episode with the great George Veras. Thank you, guys.
Thank
We will
you.
see you next time. Have a
Bye,
great
guys.
day.
Take
Thank
care,
you.
everybody.
Yes,
Bye.
Yasu. Bye, George.